Okay, I think we have a fair number of folks who have joined at this point. You may have already noticed if you've been trying to use the features on Zoom that there is no chat feature. However, we do have a Q&A poll that we'll be monitoring throughout the webinar. We'll pause for a few opportunities throughout the presentation for questions if needed. Otherwise, we'll make sure to save plenty of time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that you have. So I think, Ariana, we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to our session on crafting health messages that stick. From theory, research, and health literacy best practices, we're going to be sharing a lot of things that we are very passionate about. My name is Corinne Berry. I'm the Director of Research at Communicate Health, and I'm joined by my colleague Ariana, and I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ariana. I am an Executive Vice President at Communicate Health, and I'm also a medical provider. So a lot of what we're talking about today really applies to public health and direct care. All right. Great. So today we're going to cover these three topic areas, from theory to research to health communication, and we'll include some interactive ways to engage and practice these skills along the way. Next. This is our mission at Communicate Health. I'll say that the bottom line is really that we think people deserve clear and simple information about their health. Next. Before we dive in, let's start with a little bit of context. We all know that there's a lot going on in the world right now, from COVID-19 to systemic racism and discrimination to economic uncertainty. And information is changing rapidly. People are consuming media at an increased rate. 66% of people that use social media think that their social media use has increased since COVID as a direct result. And research estimates that people will spend about 82 minutes a day on social media sites. Additionally, we're in the middle of an unprecedented infodemic. Misinformation and falsehoods are everywhere, in which some cases have led to pretty severe outcomes, as you can see from some of these news articles. What does this mean for us? Using clear communication like health literacy and plain language best practices is even more important to communicating important messages that stick. Great. You can go to the next slide. So we'll start with priority audience. It's important to consider all of these items listed here with the purpose of getting very specific. The general public isn't an audience. You want to spend time really focusing on the key characteristics of who you want to reach. For example, we may be trying to develop materials for people with a recent cancer diagnosis. We'll start by using existing literature and data to learn a lot about that audience, and then we'll want to segment further and separate out the primary audience and clearly define them. As we gear up for our own research at Communicate Health, we develop messaging that we also think through strategic considerations for narrowing down this primary audience further. For example, who is the most affected by a particular health issue, who is easiest to reach, who is most likely to be influenced through messaging, and who is most likely ready to change. This leads well into our next slide about behavior change. Next. In health communication, we really believe that our primary audience, it's really important to identify specifically who they are and clearly define them within our teams and within our clients. And we also want to consider what we would like to do to help them change and the process that they'll need to get there. So we all know that behavior change is extremely hard. You can see this is a long, windy path all the way to that mountain at the end. Research shows that at any given time, only about 1 in 5 people are prepared to give up an unhealthy behavior and adopt a healthy new one. And behavioral economics tells us that we don't always weigh the costs with the benefits of a choice. We're often irrational in choosing behaviors that aren't in our best interest. I think we can all relate to some of these. And we know that it can be a long road and path that may not be entirely addressed by communication alone. Plain language and good design are key to helping people get there, but we also know that we need to learn about how to motivate our audience to make change using theory. Next. As we think about behavior change and communication processes, we often begin with theory. There's decades of research behind this and evidence-based to support this through social and behavioral theories that we use in our work. Today, we're going to discuss some tried and true theories and favorites. And here's a little bit of insight into some of the ways that we apply theory in this graphic. So we use theory to think about individuals, the process by which an individual changes, how they think, how they feel, and then act. We use theory to think about the audience in the aggregate. We look at what makes groups of peoples or communities similar and how to use those relationships and connections to influence or educate. And we use theory to think about our message strategy. There are many mechanisms to use to influence others through communication, and we have to identify the right ones for our audience to ensure that it works. Next. Great. So these are some questions to think about. Theory of planned behavior, it largely focuses on behavioral intentions, which are determined by a combination of these three factors here: behavioral beliefs, normative beliefs, and control beliefs. So this is attitudes toward a behavior, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. You can differentiate this theory from other theories by focusing on the deliberate or intentional behavior. And it suggests that human behavior is guided by considerations of these behavioral beliefs, which are really how likely is a good outcome versus a bad one? Is this favorable or non-favorable? Normative beliefs, do other people expect me to do it? How much do I care about their opinions? This is that perceived subjective norm. And control beliefs. So what is going to make this easier or harder for me? This is the perceived behavioral control. In general, if all of these things are good, strong, or high, then the intention to perform this behavior will be as well. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. This is also known as the trans-theoretical model, and it focuses largely on decision-making and audience readiness for change. It's not a theory per se, but rather a way of grouping thinking about audiences. One key feature of this model is recognizing that decision-making, particularly related to habitual behaviors, is an ongoing process. People can often move and jump between each of these five, and you may be further along in the stage of change and then revert back to a previous one. So there are actually 6 changes, but in health communication, we tend to focus on these 5: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. So I'm going to talk through each one of these a little bit and kind of talk about what the need from a communications perspective is. So this first one is really that you don't intend to change the behavior in the next 6 months. You maybe see more cons than pros, and you don't know what you're doing is unhealthy. The need here is really more information or encouragement. The second one is that you intend to change your behavior in the next 6 months. You may be reluctant though, or the pros and cons may be about equal. The need here is really reminding someone of the pros. This next one is that you plan to take action in the next 30 days. The pros outweigh the cons. You may already be taking steps toward behavior change already. The fourth one is that you've changed your behavior in the last 6 months. So the need here is a little bit different. It's techniques to keep moving forward. It's rewards for healthy changes. And the last one is that you've changed your behavior for more than 6 months. So you might need consistent support to avoid slipping back into an unhealthy behavior. Here's just a little example below where you can see one of those in action. Next. And I'm actually going to pass this over to my colleague, Corinne, and she's going to lead us through the next couple of slides as well as an activity.
Great, thanks, Ariana. So picking up here on where Ariana left off in terms of theories and frameworks and models, because health communication is inherently interdisciplinary, we bring a variety of theory to our work. And we really lean on a number of disciplines like psychology and public health and communication to really develop tailored and relevant health information. One of my favorite frameworks is the one that's shown here on the screen, which is Petty and Cassiobo's elaboration likelihood model. And I may be a little bit biased as a communication professional because this comes from the persuasion and communication discipline. But it essentially sort of lays out 2 different pathways to persuasion, both of which can end in some form of attitudinal change. But the basic idea here of what's shown in the model is that someone can be presented with information and that they go through some form of elaboration or processing of the information. And the whether they go through a more extensive elaboration process or a less extensive elaboration process is based on their motivation to do so. So they're making an effort to kind of evaluate, remember, and accept or reject the message. But the model really suggests that that level of elaboration is based on, whether they go this central route or this peripheral route, the top one being central, the lower one being peripheral. That central route is guided by whether or not they really kind of care about the topic or the issue. If they have a higher level of motivation and the ability to think about it, they're going to do some more deep processing of the message. They're really going to focus on and scrutinize, in some cases, the quality or the strength of the argument. And any attitudes that are formed or reinforced this way are thought to be more enduring or have more lasting change. So if it's an issue they care about and they hear a message, they're likely to engage in that higher level of elaboration and processing and more critically look at the message itself. Whereas in this peripheral path, this tends to happen where the processing is more at a superficial level, and the audience may actually pay less attention to the message. And they're likely to be influenced by more secondary factors, like source credibility or visual appeal, or how the information is presented. Things like food, sex, or humor are going to be more cues to them and more potentially influential in this case. So the attitudes that are reinforced through this pathway tend to be a little bit more temporary or less enduring, and are definitely subject to change or counter argument. And so they kind of require continual reinforcement. So really being able to understand when you're communicating with your audience, whether you want them to engage in that more central path, requires that there's some level of relevance and motivation for them to do so. And of course, considering their level and ability to do so as well, which we're going to talk about a little bit as we dive into some of the health literacy components of this. So Ariana spoke to a couple of the tried and true theories that we lean on pretty frequently. And in addition to our communication theory, we know that theory really isn't enough to drive the work that we do. We may know a lot about our audiences from either previous research or based on some of the conclusions that we draw from social and behavioral theory. But there's a lot that we probably don't know about our audience as we get started. So here are a few examples of things that we tend to think about and focus on, particularly if we're doing formative research. We need to really have that audience research to be able to get into things like their level of health literacy or the context in which they're searching for health information, the level of stress and anxiety they're experiencing in the moment. This is something we're talking about a lot these days with COVID and obviously many activities going on around anti-racism. So we have to consider where are people at. We talk about health literacy as a state and not a trait. And we know that it can fluctuate and change over time. So those are really important considerations that we think about for our audience. When we're getting started, in addition to kind of thinking about who our audience is, what we know about them from secondary research and maybe existing literature, and how we're using theory to inform the questions we're asking of our audiences, it's really important to think about digging in and understanding that audience more. As I mentioned, some of those things related to their health literacy and where they're at are really important contextual considerations for communicating. And audience research can uncover a lot of interesting clues about how to reach your audience. We'll use a variety of methods in our formative audience research. And the goal is really to stay focused on learning as much as we can about how they think and feel and behave. We want to really get below top of mind, so we use a number of strategies to do that. We want to get at some of those important values or those key motivators that will inform the approach to our writing of messages. Also, I think it's important to keep in mind that as communicators and also as human beings, we just tend to make assumptions. We think we know what's funny. We think we know what's interesting or motivating to others. but that's not always the case. And when we engage in audience research or test our communication with our audiences, we sometimes find out that our assumptions were wrong or that they were off. We talk a little bit in the business about the curse of knowledge, that those of us who spend time in healthcare and health communication, we know a lot, and we have a lot of health facts floating around our heads, and we forget what it was like to be at a time before that where we didn't have that knowledge. And so we want to make sure that we incorporate research into each stage of our health communication process so that we're constantly questioning those assumptions and really making sure that our target audience is front and center of anything that we create. So in this next slide, I have a few tips that are supposed to help encourage you that no matter what your budget is, no matter what your time frame is, that you too can do audience research. And we know that, you know, maybe when you think about research, it may seem like this very big and lofty thing, and we need 50 focus groups to be able to uncover meaningful insights into our audience. And that's not always in the budget. But research, while it can be costly, is really worth an investment of your time. Investing in any kind of messages or material development, or goodness, I mean, even campaign development, if those are not well researched, then that is certainly a cost that would be far greater than the cost of the research itself. So we really think that that formative audience research is really important to inform our efforts. But there are many ways to do research on a shoestring budget or do-it-yourself style. And we have a few ideas listed here. So one of which is you can reach out to people who are in your social network. You'd be surprised how posting on social media for an opportunity to talk to someone about something they're interested in, who will do it for free. Oftentimes many will sign up to participate, and you can get some meaningful feedback. Also, sticking with individual sessions where you can dive a little bit deeper. You may not get some of that group conversation and dynamic, but it allows you to have some really focused conversation with people who are similar or a proxy to your target audience. On this next slide, I wanted just to share with you an example of an activity or a strategy that you can use to help also with your audience research. We do a lot of collaging, and it generally is a low budget strategy to really help get below top of mind. It allows participants to use pictures to help articulate their thoughts, perceptions, and experiences. And as a bonus, it's a really effective strategy for when you're doing research with audiences with limited health literacy. It allows them to use those pictures to really bring ideas and their thoughts and feelings to life. A few of these pictures here and quotes were from participants that we had in a study for a journey mapping project where we were trying to understand what it's like to age into eligibility for Medicare. And the types of concerns and experiences they were having. And you can see a couple of quotes and interesting images that they use to describe that process. On this next slide, we have a few tips for thinking about health literacy as you're engaging in audience research. There are a number of strategies that we use in our work and encourage our partners to do the same. So in addition to sort of scaling your research to fit your budget, there's also ways in which you can make sure that you're accommodating for individuals who may have limited health literacy and make sure that their voices are heard in your research. Things like using partners within your community who are already embedded to help engage participants that may be harder to reach. One that we feel very strongly about is that we develop all of our research instruments, including our screeners and our consent forms, and our discussion guides, all in plain language, so that they're very clear and easy to understand. We also recommend using cash incentives when you can. Depending on the audience that you're researching, it may be possible that they are more transient and or don't have the ability to cash checks, or gift cards can be problematic if the particular stores that they're used for are not available to them. So we like to recommend that folks reimburse or provide honorariums in that way. So I'm going to take a couple minutes now. We obviously are a large bunch here, but I'd like you to just take a little bit of time to do this activity with us. And you can grab a piece of paper and write notes if you like, or just, sort of think through your own ideas as we go through this. But what we're going to do here is a little bit of an empathy mapping exercise. This is something that we internal to our teams will often do, and will sometimes even do if we don't have a robust budget for doing a lot of audience research, at least to get us in the mindset of our target audience and what are their perceptions and what is it like to walk a mile in their shoes. So we're going to take a moment to see through the eyes of another and do a little empathy mapping. So in this scenario, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our individual, Sam. She is a full-time working mom. She has a demanding job that is rather fast-paced, and she's always juggling how to get through the day with 3 kids at home. You can imagine right now she might be experiencing that even more with potential quarantine scenario. And one of the challenges she's experiencing is that recently her youngest son has been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease. And she's struggling to figure out how to effectively manage it and understand how to get his care. So in these next couple of slides, we're going to walk through a few questions. And I just invite you, because we don't have a chat feature, to think and reflect on these questions. And again, you can jot down a couple of notes. But this is really just an exercise for us to get in the mindset of what Sam might be experiencing. So as we try to empathize with Sam, we want to take a moment to really consider, what it is that she has going on and what kinds of things are, in her environment. What is she seeing? What are the things that are happening around her and impacting her? Curious about what kinds of things she might be reading or watching related to health, particularly for her son's condition. Perhaps a set of questions here that might be a little bit easier for you to connect to is around what do we think that she's thinking and feeling. I'm sure that we can relate to maybe some of the things that she might be worried about, or what are some of the things that she's feeling in terms of frustration. What are the obstacles that she's encountering, whether it be to get her son appropriate care or to find the information that she needs to support him at home. Also, what kinds of information she might be reading that's confusing to her. And then, this piece about gains, what are the things that she is wanting to find or hear? What does she need to know? What are her goals related to her son's autoimmune condition and what she's trying to achieve for him and for her family? As we continue to empathize with Sam, we want to reflect a little bit now on what kinds of things she's hearing. So around, with the people that are around her, what are the kinds of things that she may hear from friends and family? What might she be hearing from even strangers or people on social media, online or secondhand, whether it be about her son's condition or about just sort of managing her life with the things that she has going on. And then last but not least, we want to think about what are some of the things that Sam might be saying or doing. We're really interested in how she's communicating. We're interested in how she's behaving during this time. So we think about who is she talking to? What kinds of things do you think that she needs to talk about or needs to sort of get off of her chest or have someone to discuss and dialogue with? Where do we think that she's going for information, and who is she trusting in that process? How is she behaving and how is she communicating and all of that? So that concludes our brief little thought exercise here, but what I wanted to be able to share with you all, and in a different setting, we might do a small group discussion and reflection on some of the things that came to mind for you as we brought up those questions. But this is really the very beginnings of how we translate what we hear in our audience research to how we think about developing our messaging. If we had done this exercise for real and as a group, we would potentially have uncovered a lot about, our perspective on what Sam may be thinking, feeling, saying, and doing. And through that exercise, we'd have a fairly good idea of what might be her information needs. What is it that she wants to know or learn? And this ultimately informs the type of information that we will provide in our health messaging. We would probably have a good sense also of her emotional needs. What is it that she needs to hear, whether it be from friends and family or healthcare providers, others in her support circle? This is really going to also guide sort of the framing and the level of empathy and support that we're including in our health messaging to Sam. And then last but not least, we're also hoping that we would have drawn out some insight around her preferred sources. Who are those people, or where are those resources that Sam particularly trusts for her information? And this is going to guide our dissemination strategy. This is going to help us really think through, who do we want to serve as messengers, whether it be print materials or information that's living online. Who are those trusted sources for Sam that we know are going to have a little bit more impact? So on this next piece, I'm going to turn it back over to Ariana to talk a little bit about writing sticky messages and content.
Great, thank you, Corinne. All right, so in order for messages to stick or have the desired outcome, our audience has to do the following with a message: pay attention or notice it, be able to understand it and actually recall it, believe that it's real or have a favorable attitude toward it, care enough to consider its merits, and then ultimately to take action on it. Given all of these theories and frameworks that we just discussed, as well as the empathy mapping exercise, you can probably see that there are many opportunities for this path to behavior change to also go off course. So we're going to talk a little bit about some tips for writing for behavior change to help along the way. Next, thank you. So these are some strategies that are just good rules of thumb to help facilitate the path to behavior change. So I'll talk about each of these a little bit more. So the first one, there are studies that show that focusing on the positive rather than focusing on the threat or negative is actually more potent at encouraging healthy behavior. The second one here is about making the content understandable and putting it in context. So for example, instead of saying, you used 2,000 kilowatts of energy last month, you could say instead, it cost you about $10 a day to run your electricity or your air conditioning. This third one is really about answering the question that we're all asking: what's in it for me? Behavior change, again, like we said, is hard. So if we make the choice easier by the way that we write about it, that can be very important for folks. This fourth one is small action steps and really breaking it down for people. Instead of going for the end all be all, something like exercise for 150 minutes each week, which can feel daunting and maybe overwhelming to people, you could try to break it down into really specific, small and attainable steps, like try doing push-ups during a commercial break or a TV show. This fifth one is really about answering the questions that people are coming and asking. We know that people are especially looking for an answer to a question online when they search for information. So if we can make it easier and put it up front, it can really help them. Some common questions that we know are being asked is, what do I need to do next? Am I safe? Is my family safe? How can I keep my family safe? How much do I have to pay? These are just a couple of examples of health information that people may be searching for. Can go to the next one. So some of you have read the book by Chip and Dan Heath called Made to Stick: Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. There's a citation at the bottom there. We highly recommend this book. It's a quick and enjoyable read. And they use this term sticky to refer to messages in our cluttered information environments that stand out and can have a lasting impact. They're we can think about them in the way of, ads that really stick with us, that we remember, that we've watched on TV, or a message on social media that's struck a chord with us personally. So the Heath brothers use this lovely acronym, SUCCESS, which is also sticky within itself because it's pretty memorable and easy to refer back to. And it includes these elements. So it It's saying that messages should be simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and tell a good story. This isn't saying that they should do all of those all at once, but to use elements of each of these. It's useful because it draws information also from social and behavioral science theory, and good messages are really created in ways by using some of these skills. So we'll actually look and watch a video that demonstrates this in action a little bit more, and then we'll share a couple of examples and call out which elements of the sticky success model. And this video that Corinne is pulling up right now is the Go Red for Women campaign PSA from Elizabeth Banks. It's a great example of applying this success model, like I said, in action, and we can think a little bit more about what makes it sticky.
It started out like a totally normal day.
Mom!
Okay, move objection deadline to the third line after survey. Oh, honey, for when you always use the verb estar. What are you doing down there? Did you finish your breakfast?
Ow.
Whew. Don't hit your brother. Honey, you have to eat something. Here. Okay, 5 minutes to carpool. Where's my coffee?
You okay, Mom?
Oh, I'm fine. Sandwich orders. What do you want?
Almond butter and jelly.
Spaghetti.
You sure you're okay?
I'm fine, sweetie.
I am so late. Hey, buddy, how you doing? Hey, honey. You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
You sure?
Oh, yeah. Here.
Acai, my favorite. See you guys later.
Where are your shoes? Put your shoes back on, please. You know, go help your sister. We're going in 3 minutes. Oh my God, what am I doing? I forgot to cut off the crust. Voila. Shoes on, potty if you need it. Honey, get your sister. Okay, get her shoes. Nobody move. I'm getting a dustpan. Oh.
Mom! I think you're having a heart attack.
Honey, do I look like the type of person who has a heart attack? I'm just gonna sit down. I'm totally fine. Don't forget to wear the high socks with the shin guards.
Forget about the shin guards, Mom.
Come on, Mrs. Underdog is not gonna wait. Whoa. Okay. 9, 1, 1. Hi, sorry to bother you. I think I might be having a little heart attack. Nothing really, just some nausea, tightening of the jaw, dizziness, shortness of breath, muscle pain, achiness, this terrible pressure in my chest. Oh, really? They can be here in how long? 2 minutes. Can you make it 10? I thought I had gas. Turns out I was having a heart attack. Heart disease is the #1 killer of American women. So now I take care of my heart, and I tell the women in my life to do the same.
Sounds great, by the way.
That's nice, sweetie, but that's not my heart. That is. Make it your mission to save your life and the lives of the women you love. Find out more from the American Heart Association at goredforwomen.org.
Great, thank you. I'm sure many of you were thinking a little bit about which ones that actually highlighted, and I think quite a few of them. We'll actually talk about some examples on the next slide and highlight the success model. Great, so these are a couple of work examples from Communicate Health. They're not celebrity studded like the last PSA, but they focus on educating and influencing audiences' health behaviors. They are developed in both digital and print formats. The one on the left, Your Best Shot Shingles Vaccine, I'll talk about this one a little bit. So this was a video series that we developed for the National Vaccine Program. So some of the success model that it uses is it's simple, concrete, and tells a story. It's simple because it uses this fun play on words and plain language. So saying shot versus vaccine. It's concrete. The videos that were created for this campaign are clear and designed to visually demonstrate how vaccines actually work. And in testing, we found that the videos were vivid and appealed to both older and younger populations. And it tells a story. You can see on the right-hand side of that, a little germ or virus who is the villain, and they're on a mission to make everyone sick. So this narrative helps simplify the science behind infectious disease and really helps people understand the importance of taking action. I'll talk a little bit about the second example too. This one is interesting because it uses some different elements. So it uses an emotional element. It's a key, I'll explain it first, sorry. The poster is part of a campaign that focuses on educating urgent care patients on antibiotic resistance and curbing the use of unnecessary antibiotics. And the target audience for the campaign was millennial moms. So it's emotional. It uses this headline that says, "Being sick is the worst," uses empathetic languages to convey a sense of understanding around how difficult it might be to have a sick child. And it's also a bit unexpected. It takes a different approach. It's not dismissive. It actually educates the audience about antibiotic resistance rather than saying, don't do this, don't take antibiotics. It instead uses language like, antibiotics may not be the right treatment for your cold or flu. Ask your doctor what will help make you feel better. This last example is for the Move Your Way campaign, a national initiative to promote physical activity. It's simple. It has messaging that focuses on doing what you love to be physically active rather than being prescriptive. It's concrete. It uses these visual examples of the types of physical activity that count, and it focuses on contemplators specifically who need some concrete steps and to get started. So going back to the models that we were talking about before. And it's also credible. It's connected to the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans, which has an extensive campaign material on health.gov. So the next couple of slides, we'll talk about quick tips and takeaways that will hopefully you'll be able to apply in your day-to-day work. We can go to the next slides. Put the most important information first. This is a great one you've probably heard or are familiar with. So all of us have, we can actually go to the next slide. Thank you. All of us have limited attention spans and limited working memory, not just people that have limited literacy skills. So people often look for the most important information at the beginning of the text. You might scan the titles or headers or look at the first paragraph to try to understand if it's relevant or important to you. And really starting with the most important information that you want as the takeaway will ensure that people are seeing it. And it also signals direct, honest communication. You can make this a little bit more visually appealing too. You can emphasize the main message with design or visual cues like bold text, larger font, call-out boxes, etc. And I'll also say that people who struggle with health literacy even have even less of a working memory than everyone else, and everyone else already has a limited working memory. So many users with limited literacy skills will only scan actually the first few words on a page or paragraph. And if it looks difficult or hard to get through, often people will just jump off the website or stop reading. The bottom line is really never make the most important information hard to find and hunt for. We want to put that up top and make sure that that messaging comes first. You're probably familiar with this as well. News stories use this format often. It's called the inverted pyramid. I'm wondering too if our attention span is even less than 8 seconds these days with everything going on too. All right, the next slide talks about plain language and using common words. You'll see on the next slide, there's a huge text. I don't know if it's not, oh, there we go. So the bottom line is that we recommend writing how you speak. Formal language like passive voice is a big no-no, and it's another barrier to making health information less understandable and accessible. Voice and tone. So voice is the style or personality of the writing overall. It's a constant. And then tone is really the mood of the writing. It's flexible, and your goal is really to change it to match what you think your reader's emotional state will be. So for example, if someone got a recent cancer diagnosis, you might change your tone appropriately to meet their emotional state versus if you're just writing about cancer as a topic area itself. This slide has a ton of language. If you've taken the time to read it, you've probably realized that it's slow to move through it. You might have to pause to pronounce words or really figure out what these jargon terms are all about. I'll just say that plain language really isn't about dumbing down content when we talk about writing how you speak or simplifying. It's really about helping readers move through information and being able to process it and retain it more easily. We can go to the next. And small action steps. We've talked about this a little bit already, but we know that big steps to changing our behavior can be difficult, and that small steps are really more digestible, and they're often perceived as more doable and can actually lead you to lasting change. You can go to the next slide. Some recent smoking cessation campaigns like Every Try Counts focus on this very thing, taking those small, taking a big behavior change and breaking it down into doable steps. And it doesn't give you too much information all at once, but it kind of parses it out at a speed that makes sense. Another example of a small step might be, use a calcium shopping list to find foods high in calcium when you're at the grocery store, or try out one new vegetable each week, making it feel possible to do. You can go to the next slide. So our last tip today is using familiar examples. We can go to the next one. Great. So this is really important to making sticky messages, and familiar examples can really help in that. Metaphors allow us to understand one domain of experience in terms of another, and visual metaphors are often a great way to convey numbers that don't always make sense. So this is an example here. Instead of maybe saying popcorn has X amount of grams of saturated fat, which then you're asking yourself a question of, well, how much is okay? And is that a lot or a little? Without that context, it can be hard to fully understand. So this example here really talks about the amount of saturated fat within movie theater popcorn, and it helps audiences put something together with that number to make it make sense. This is the example below, and metaphors don't add facts necessarily to the description. Rather, they add that depth of meaning that is really helpful for putting it in context for people. All right, so we have about 5 minutes left, and I'm sure people have questions, so we'll open it up for questions. Started to answer some in the Q&A, but then had to start talking, so I apologize for that delay. Corinne, do you want to start with the questions that are in there right now?
Sure. So they actually both are essentially the same thing, which was talking a little bit about the empathy mapping exercise. And I think they raised a really, really critical point, which is that, empathy mapping is a way for us to sort of start the process of looking through the eyes of our target audience and trying to really get into their hearts and minds, recognizing that we're bringing our own lens and our own experiences on the world with that activity, right? And it is truly just an exercise, and it is not bias free. And so I don't recommend it as your one and only audience activity. It's just a great way to help, particularly stakeholders. We've found that oftentimes when we do formative research first, and then we're helping to really kind of flesh out with a client and define those target audiences in a more meaningful way, we'll use these empathy mapping exercises, and it'll be informed by our audience research data to help our stakeholders really step into the shoes of their target audiences. It helps them think about why we might prioritize certain messages, or why we might use some channels. It's very easy for us to say, oh, well, all teenagers are on social media, or all older adults don't use computers, or like to overgeneralize and play into those stereotypes. And so these exercises can actually be really useful to break people free from those stereotypes and make evidence-based decisions. So I like to see these empathy mapping exercises done in conjunction with formative research, where we're hearing directly those words and those feelings and perceptions from the target audience themselves. But in the absence of that, this is sometimes a way to get your team just a one step closer to making sure that your communication is going to work for your target audience. Anything that you want to add, Ariana?
I think that's great.
Great. And we have a few minutes left. If there's any other questions from the group, we're happy to field those. And we really thank you all very much for your time and attention and the active participation on Q&A. Wish we could see all of your faces, although that might have been a little bit of an overwhelming group to see all at once. So thanks everyone for your time and attention. And if you have any questions, are certainly welcome to contact us. Our contact information, I believe, is on our website. And also our slides are available on the IHA conference website, where we have all of our references to each of the books or citations that we mentioned today. Okay, well, I think that wraps us up. Ariana, I don't see any other questions, just a lot of nice notes.
Yes, thank you everyone.
And we appreciate your time and attention today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.